special presentation from the Suicide Squadcast Network in association with Thought Bubble Audio. I'm Scott from the Suicide Squadcast.
And I am Tim from Thought Bubble Audio. Scott, thanks for having me on.
Well, hey, thanks for coming over. I looked at our Skype call, and it's been like April 30th since we did this last, and it's just been too damn long.
We haven't talked about this since April. Well, 6 months, yeah, 7 issues, yeah, that's about right. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, time does fly when you are alive. Okay, so so let's get right into it. We already talked about issue 1 of Batman and the Shadow, put out by DC and Dynamite, right? So
yes.
let's do the whole thing, and then we could talk about Shadow Batman, the sequel, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm gonna be completely honest here. I read that first issue. I was so excited.
Mm-hmm.
We recorded our review back in April, and then I kept on buying the rest of the series, and then never read it.
Oh no!
This is nothing new for me. I get way behind, and I was so busy trying to catch up on all the other books that were even more months behind, that keeping up with something that was non-continuity and was newer, it fell into the pile like everything else.
Oh no, I understand. I've got 42 books sitting here in my Comixology that I have not read yet. So
I wish it was only 42. I'm jealous. I'm jealous of that, actually.
Well, I try to keep it at 42 because it's the meaning of life. So I just
that's well played, sir.
Thank you.
Played.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I actually just read all of these books, 2 through 6, and issue number 1 of the Shadow Batman, which I didn't even know was coming out last Thursday.
Oh, okay. Okay. So this is real fresh for you.
Yes,
that's good because I have not revisited any of the issues since I read them. So going back 4, 5, 6 months ago, but that's okay. I think most of it, the story is not super dense.
No, it's not, and that was kind of disappointing, to be honest. I found that first issue so layered with so many possibilities, and I mean, I remember us joking about how, hey, we're going to record like a 10, 15-minute recording that ended up being, 30 minutes, 45 minutes of us talking about one issue?
Right, it was huge.
Right, and then I read 2 through 6, and I just kind of went, that was a thing.
Maybe that's possibly because you binged it.
Really? You think that this was one of the series that if I had read it like month to month, it would have felt more like something? Explain. I'm very curious about this.
So I read this was a book that I pushed to the top of the pile whenever it came out, because I love Batman, but I hardcore love the Shadow. And so the merging of these two things together is something I've been waiting for, I guess, since I was a little kid, but really since I was, I think, in college. I went to New York Comic Con, and this was back when I might have said this on the first episode, don't remember.
I think you did, but go ahead. It's been 6 months.
Right.
It's okay.
Yeah. So I went to New York Comic Con, and this was when DC was still doing its first wave series where like Batman teamed up with, Doc Savage and the Spirit and blah blah blah. And I asked a question. I raised my hand, and Dan DiDio called on me. We're BFFs now. And I said, "Are there any plans to introduce the Shadow?" And I clearly struck a chord somewhere because clearly they had been trying to get the character and failed because it ended up going to Dynamite, and they had basically said not at this time, we just kind of the character's going to another company. And then here we are all these years later, it must be 10 years later now, and here I am reading Batman. So I've been waiting, I guess essentially I've been waiting for this for 10 years. So every one of these issues kind of felt like an event to me.
Okay.
I guess. Okay. Even if the first one is the jammed issue, there's a lot of layer building. I guess the central mystery is, did the Shadow actually train Batman or not?
Now that was a concept that kept me hooked the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that was oh, this is where they're going? Because I always like to think of these crossover events. I can't remember who explained this. I think it was actually like in that that Crisis on Infinite Earths. If you get the Absolute Edition, you get that nice little like companion book that has like the catalog of like all the Earths.
Uh-huh.
And I think there was some talk about like whenever a crossover happened, there was an Earth that these crossovers were happening on. So it was like its own alternate reality. Like there was an Earth where all the DC Marvel crossovers happen. So the idea that there is an actual continuity here where the Shadow was all those people in Batman's life, and I could entertain that as a real possibility because it's one possibility in the multiverse that I completely dug, and I was willing to buy in the fact that the Shadow was actually Ducard.
Mm-hmm. I was too. I was totally in on that because that's not really a character that I have any affinity towards. You know, my exposure to the character comes from Batman Begins, in which he is a duplicitous character, like he's just a facade. So I was totally willing to be like, oh, he's also the facade in the comic books. This is great. So actually, you raised an interesting point here that I want to touch on. So is this book by DC and Dynamite in continuity, or is it not?
I'm saying it's not. The idea that it has a Rebirth era Batman,
yep,
with a Shadow that, you know, is in modern time. And I just consider this like one of those Earths that's not completely different, but just slightly different. You know, the idea of, you know, that the possibilities, and so that not every Earth has to be this drastically different Earth from another.
Right.
And I just kind of consider that it's that one that's just like vibrationally like one tick to one side. Mm-hmm. And so we can have an Earth that looks similar, but there are some slight differences, like the Shadow exists in the DC universe, and that's how I treat it.
Okay, I am willing to agree with you here, especially when it comes to Shadow Batman, because at the beginning of that issue, I'm like, when is this supposed to take place? What actually throws me from that point of view is that we're looking at a Rebirth costumed Batman, and so I wonder, what's the point of using the Rebirth costume if it's not inside the DC universe proper, or at least, you know, Earth 1 or Earth Prime or whatever we're calling it these days? Why use that costume? Why is that the DC mandate if it's not in the regular continuity?
I just say because that's the current continuity. And that's almost always been the way in all these crossovers. The characters have always been the version that they are at the time. I mean, look at Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He was in the pre-Rebirth New 52 costume.
Right, exactly. And then he was in the animated series costume for the animated series version.
And then look at Justice League Power Rangers. You know, that even has Rebirth Superman, like the Clark from pre-Flashpoint in it, because that's the version of Superman, that's the version of Justice League that exists at that time.
Is that a Dynamite crossover as well?
That's Boom Studios.
Boom Studios. Okay, I didn't think Dynamite had Power Rangers. Okay, so if that's the case, so here's another question then: do all of these crossovers with DC Dynamite, DC Boom, whatever, do they exist within the same little continuity? So is the Ninja Turtles meeting up with the Batman the same continuity as Batman meeting up with the Shadow, as the same as Green Lantern meeting up with the cast of Star Trek, as, you know, the Power Rangers and the Justice League? Do they all exist in the same little world?
That is a good question. I have two possible answers for that. One answer would be the different Earth would be based on which company you're crossing over with. Mm-hmm. So, like, if DC did multiple crossovers with Dynamite, I'd be more willing to say, okay, this is the DC Dynamite Earth.
Right.
This is the DC IDW Earth. Mm-hmm. You know, the same way that there was an Earth, I think there was even a number for the DC Marvel Earth back when DC Marvel used to play along.
That's right.
So, but also in those other stories, in Justice League Power Rangers or in Batman Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, there is acknowledgement in the plot that the characters from the other company have traveled the multiverse onto the DC Earth. What makes Batman's Shadow so unique is, no, Shadow's existed there. Like, he has existed. This is not Shadow traveling to a different dimension, to a different Earth, like Justice League, Power Rangers, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's just been there.
That's a good point.
And that really solidifies for me the fact that this is just another Earth that's just a few ticks away from Earth Zero.
That is a very interesting point. So going forward with these issues, if you look at issue 3, there's this collage sequence where it looks like, Alfred's talking to the Shadow, and he's like, "What do you mean many students?" And the Shadow says, "I've built an army over the decades," and we see a bunch of these different costumed heroes, and a lot of them are a good chunk of them are the Dynamite characters, the pulp characters. Others are, one is potentially the Spirit. Oh no, maybe I don't.
One looks like Green Arrow.
One is definitely Green Arrow, and one is definitely in the bottom right corner. One is definitely the Reaper, which is the character that Phantasm was based off of.
Yeah, from year 2.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's Miss Fury at the top. Could potentially be Catwoman.
Well, I thought there was a Miss Fury and a Catwoman. I thought Catwoman was the one in the top left-hand corner.
Oh, yeah.
Like the very first one. And I thought Miss Fury was like the one next row over to the right.
Okay, I think so too. It's just the Catwoman look like she has a cape, and it threw me off. But I guess that would, maybe she's in her like super old costume when she did have a cape.
Right. At least that was how because funny enough, I don't have the books in front of me, but I know the exact panel you're talking about. And yeah, that was my interpretation, because I was noticing the other Dynamite characters as well. And so, yeah, that was my idea, that this is an Earth where, because most of those Dynamite characters, while not all the Dynamite series are my cup of tea, I do like the fact that they all tend to be, I like the ones that are period pieces.
Yep.
I tend to avoid the ones that modernize them, and I tend to pick up on the ones that's like, no, I am going to set this in the 30s.
That's funny that you say that, because like the Dynamite's doing a modern Shadow book right now, and it's pretty good. And I'm normally with you. Like, I feel like pulp characters exist as a pulp character for like they're of their time, and that's kind of where they should stay. But for whatever reason, the Shadow is a character I feel like you can kind of get away with moving him out. And because at the end of the day, you recognize enough of Batman, or enough of the Shadow in Batman that you can agree with the Shadow being in the modern day.
It kind of works in this series the same way. He never felt out of place.
No, he doesn't. I think the only time I think he might feel out of place is when he is, because his costume is not necessarily a costume,
Right.
I actually felt that felt more out of place in the scenes where he's with all of the inmates from Arkham, and that I'm not sure if he felt out of place because I'm seeing him with
Killer Croc and Scarecrow,
right,
and everybody else.
Right. But because a lot of Batman's villains or allies, whatever, just wear suits and coats. The Riddler is just wearing a green suit. There's really nothing special, about it. So the Shadow kind of fits the decor of Batman's rogues gallery. So maybe it was just jarring to see. It was just jarring to see the Shadow with all these different characters.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question that I have been dying to ask you since I binged the series. The Stag.
Yeah.
Is that an actual Shadow character? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I was sitting there going, I have no idea who this is. This is not a Shadow character that I have any familiarity with whatsoever.
Good question. I actually don't have a definitive answer. I am 99% sure that it is a new character for the crossover.
Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better, because I think part of my frustration with reading this crossover was that I have enough Shadow knowledge that I found the first issue extremely entertaining. But then as it went on, and especially when it became very heavily involved with the Stag, I felt like I was kind of like the kid on the outside looking in going, who's this? Is this someone I'm supposed to know? Am I just so ignorant of the Shadow that this is like a major villain that I'm unfamiliar with? And so I think it kind of gave me like outsider syndrome, that I was just like, this isn't fun anymore.
Oh yeah, they're like, oh, I'm not I wasn't invited to the party.
Yeah.
No, I can understand. No, the Shadow's not really known for his rogues gallery. Mostly because he would in the pulps he would kind of dispatch
Kill
of them.
them all.
Right, exactly. It wasn't like we need them to come back for a reoccurring character because they're an interesting character. That doesn't exist in the pulps. So Shiwan Khan is one of the only Shadow villains that people go, oh yeah, I know that one.
Well, that's because of the movie, and I'll completely. I mean, I'll go, yeah, Alec Baldwin movie, and we talked about that in the last review. It's like that's the reason I know who that is.
Right, exactly. And I mean, like, I want to say Matt Wagner recently did a Shadow book called The Death of Margot Lane, and in it I think it's the daughter of Shiwan Khan or something. I can't remember exactly, but I was like, yeah, Shiwan Khan, I am totally on board for this book because I know who this villain is. But I really liked the Stag. I thought the character was interesting and scary and had a great character design. I
love the tie back to Kane. It's really weird, but anything that is like we connect ourselves to that very first murder, in history according to the Bible, it's like you kind of got me. I'm kind of all in, kind of like the crime Bible in in Batman continuity, in the religion of crime. I kind of dig that. I really do.
No, I love all of that. I love all of that stuff. I mean, that whether you're religious or not, I like that idea of being so interconnected, so closely connected to Cain and Abel goes all the way back to Beowulf. Like Grendel is made because monsters are made in the world according to Beowulf because Cain murdered his brother, and from that he spawned monsters, and one of those monsters is Grendel. So we've been telling the story of like monsters and evil and whatever else let loose in the world as like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We've been telling that story. So I'm on board. That is a proud tradition that I am happy to be a part of.
Okay, one other thing that I kind of have, I'm not sure if it's a gripe, but it's something that towards the end of the Batman Shadow, because we're about to jump into talking briefly about Shadow Batman. If I get a scorecard to follow along here, folks. Okay, forgive me if I'm going to get this wrong, but the land where Shadow was trained, Shambhala. Okay, D instead of a B. Shambhala. My interpretation, based solely on reading like some Dynamite comics like Shadow Year One, and then seeing the Alec Baldwin movie, I got more of kind of like the Iron Fist, mystic Tibetan monk kind of feel from Shambhala. And in this series, at the end, I'm sorry, that was straight up Cthulhu Lovecraftian alien monster things at the end, and I did not I didn't go there because that was not my expectation of what Shambhala has been portrayed for me. And once again, I'm asking you as kind of more of a Shadow expert. Is that actual continuity, the sort of Lovecraftian Cthulhu-looking things, or is that something that was kind of different for this series?
Great question. Again, I'm 100% with you. That is not the Shambhala that I have known, like, ever. So I'm going to guess that's a Scott Snyder, Steve Orlando thing. It kind of almost feels like a Scott Snyder thing. He's like, let's do this crazy thing that we haven't thought of before.
Yeah. The one thing that I think gets me is I remember us talking about the first issue, and the first issue seemed to very clearly state, Scott Snyder and Steve Orlando writers for the first issue.
Yeah.
But I noticed with 2 through 6, it was they still said Scott Snyder, Steve Orlando writers, but it was more like plot.
It says Scott Snyder, Steve Orlando story, and then script and by Steve Orlando.
Right. Which, maybe this is a little unfair, but I've been reading Steve Orlando's Rebirth books, and they tend to be like my least favorite ones. So I'm also kind of concerned about like how his scripting goes. I'm kind of curious if Scott Snyder had been able to have more of a hand in the actual script part instead of just the plotting. I wonder if there would have been a flavor to the book that maybe would have appealed to me more. than Steve Orlando, who I will admit I kind of go into with a prejudice against, because I'm not really enjoying Supergirl, and I'm definitely not enjoying Justice League of America.
That's funny that you say that, because I'm not big on Steve Orlando either. The only book that I actually think was really good was Midnighter.
Oh no, you are so true on that one. Yes, I forgot to be honest, I forgot he wrote Midnighter, because I really enjoyed that one.
So Steve Orlando has like a lot of good grace with me, because that book Midnighter is not a character I have any affinity for. I didn't read The Authority, or I hadn't at the time. It's just, to me, was like I understood the point of the character and what the commentary it was making at the time, but didn't really care. And I kind of gave it a shot just for the sake of giving it a shot, and I thought it was awesome. And I was so disappointed when the book was canceled, because it was my one of my go to the top of the list books. So he has a lot of good grace for me for that. But I definitely agree with you about the other books. I'm just not with them for whatever reason. And sometimes you just don't connect with certain writers at different times. Like, I was not big on James Tynion the Fourth for a long time, and now I can't get enough of his stuff. So,
well, Detective Comics is rocking
right now. It's so good. Like, I can't even like tell people how good it is without blubbering too much. So I think it was like that, like, get the ball rolling to get people to buy the book, and maybe they won't notice that Steve Orlando is the one scripting it. And now on Shadow Batman, it's just Steve Orlando. There's no Scott Snyder at all.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest, I feel it.
You can tell.
I can tell. Here's my thing about, because here's where we transition to Shadow Batman, which is actually being published by Dynamite.
I have one bit on the Batman Shadow.
Oh, hit it, please.
I really like that it's still ambiguous, that we don't really know the true identity of the Shadow, I guess, that he is this kind of... I like this added mythology that he's immortal because he doesn't have somebody to take his place, and he is forever, like, kind of doomed to be the Shadow.
Yes.
I think that's super interesting, and I love that we're going to get right away, get more adventures with them and all of this stuff. But the last page of the book, I love that Batman says "I know" to the Shadow, because the Shadow knows everything. The Shadow knows. And so Batman saying "I know" to him is a great slap in the face, but an affirmation and a wink and a nod to the audience. It's a great way to end the book.
I will agree there. I think if I had been giving myself enough time to breathe between issues, instead of that sort of... Normally, I don't mind binging, because it's like reading the trade, and it's like I trade weight with single issues. It's just how my life goes.
Yep.
And maybe it just didn't work this way. Maybe this was a book that needed to be read month to month. I hadn't considered that, actually.
And I like binging too. Some books don't work as well binging or reading month to month. It depends on the story. This one, to me, because it was that central mystery, and I just wanted to know... what the relationship between Batman and the Shadow was, and it took me 6 months to get there. I liked that it kind of let me revel in that mystery, as opposed to reading it in an hour and a half, and I don't get the full weight, I guess.
I'm there. I can completely respect that, and it's just my fault for being busy and all that.
How dare you have a life, Scott?
I know.
How dare you?
What can I say?
Yeah.
Well, before we're transitioning, I feel like I want to do a couple different transitions. What are you drinking tonight?
Right now I'm drinking a Polar Seltzer, Ruby Red Grapefruit. It's delicious and calorie free.
Oh, mine is most definitely not calorie free. I'm drinking a local brew here from the Fairhope Brewing Company from Fairhope, Alabama. It's called I Drink Therefore I Amber.
That's awesome. That's an amazing title for a beer. That's awesome.
Oh, no, here's the description. I Drink Therefore I Amber is an eminently drinkable American-style amber ale. Don't overthink it. Just put it in Descartes.
Oh, that's awesome. I wish they weren't local so I could buy them.
Oh, I might... Even if it wasn't for interstate alcohol laws, I'd ship you some. I just don't want to be arrested by the ABC.
I appreciate you not getting arrested on behalf of your family, and I appreciate the gesture nonetheless. That is awesome. I will try to procure some if I can.
Oh my God. Okay. So now that we've our homage to Beer With Geeks on Thought Bubble Audio, check them out,
check
please.
Check them out on Thought Bubble Audio. Very good. Thank you for plugging my my own stuff. I'm very tired now. So.
Oh yeah, we had all kinds of problems getting into this, so it's been a long night for both of us. So we're gonna make this last part quick because we've only got one issue of the Shadow Batman published by Dynamite Entertainment. Batman the Shadow was technically published by DC Comics. And so Dynamite's publishing this one, and you can tell too. This one looks like a Dynamite book.
Yes, it does. It is. Well, one, it's Giovanni Timpano as on the art, which is a Dynamite artist,
and it has that sort of quote Dynamite feel. I wish I could objectively describe what that is, but any of you who read comics, just when you're reading a Dynamite book,
right? Like when you're reading a Boom Studios book, or they have an in-house style. No,
yes.
Kind of like even like a Marvel book. Like you when it's a Marvel book. Sometimes it's actually not even about the art; it's about the way it's colored and inked. Like they have house inkers, even if the artist isn't it. So like shadows fall a very particular way. There's a certain slate that you kind of have to follow to make sure everything kind of feels authentic to the publisher, which I like. I don't necessarily always love Dynamite's style, though. Sometimes it feels sparse.
I was about to say sparse, or I know this is going to sound awful, but cheap.
Yeah, and it's not every book. It's definitely not every book. It's not every book. Like the James Bond books, like you could argue maybe look that way, but they're awesome. Like that style really works for that character and the stories that they're telling. So I think sometimes the art just doesn't really match. Like you'd want almost like the pulp issues to have, like the pulp characters to have more detail. Like you're living in the age of Art Deco, and it just feels kind of chintzy.
Yeah,
but
which. I don't think I can accuse the Shadow Batman of doing that.
No, I think this book looks amazing.
Yeah, it does. Here's my thing about Shadow Batman, because as much as I was kind of maybe a little meh on Batman the Shadow when I finished it, I just felt a very sort of hard drop into Shadow Batman. Like it didn't feel like the same book. And it's not, but yet I felt like because it's kind of a continuation that it should be. I felt like the lack of Scott Snyder's maybe sort of guiding hand on the book, and Steve Orlando just kind of being left to his own devices. The biggest thing I have to say, and this is my biggest criticism, is there's only really two people in the world who I like the way they write Damian, and it's Grant Morrison and Peter Tomasi.
Oh, I love the way Peter Tomasi writes Damian.
I know.
He did it good at it.
He was great in Batman and Robin. Mm-hmm. He's great in Super Sons right now. I mean, and even the times that Damian shows up in the Superman book, I mean, he nails Damian, and Steve Orlando does not.
No, I totally agree. He regresses Damian, if anything.
Yes. It's like this is Damian when he first showed up, like in Grant Morrison's run. Like this is not the Damian who's kind of grown a little bit over the past few years.
I agree. We talked about earlier about where this like would fit into continuity, whatever, and I guess because it's its own continuity, you can almost allow that, right? Because this is a Damian that struck out on his own. He's living in New York. He's not part of the Bat family or the Teen Titans or anything like that. He is pure and simple on his own. So maybe this feels like it's existing in a very early stage of Batman and Robin's relationship, because there's even like that scene where Bruce and Alfred are in the manor and Bruce says this would have been his room, as if like he didn't even get a chance to put Damian in the manor, so it's like,
yeah,
it feels like this exists right after Son of Batman or Batman and Son, whatever the storyline.
The book is called Batman and Son. The movie was called Son of Batman.
That's it. Okay, so it feels like it exists like right after Batman and Son, and then so there's like arguably tons and tons of his time for these characters for Damian to grow into that kind of character that we know him now.
I know, and it just and it felt very. You know what? It continues to make it feel very more sense. The fact that Professor Pig was the villain in the first issue,
Definitely,
because Morrison created Professor Pig for Batman and Robin back when Bruce was dead or sent back in time or whatever the hell happened. Because I still haven't read that. I still haven't read that era. Like I read the Batman RIP and I've kind of stopped and I haven't picked up. So I'm just like, what the hell?
Oh, the Dick Grayson Batman stuff is really good. Actually.
I know, and I need to read it, and I have it. I just haven't read it yet.
His Batman and Robin stuff, like the introduction of Professor Pig and all that stuff is great. I highly recommend.
So then, for someone like you who have read it, how did you feel about the portrayal of Professor Pig and like this very early kind of Damian, like maybe like right after Bruce came back? Like how, like does it feel more like that? Because like you said, I think I was put off by just when the hell is this happening in continuity?
Yeah, I was definitely like I was put off by like when is this exactly? But I actually did like the Professor Pig. It's one of the more modern Batman villains that I've kind of taken to. I think he's weird and creepy, and I like that a lot of the stuff he says doesn't make sense, but he deliberately does that to throw people off. So like he's actually a smart guy, but he's still crazy. Like I think Steve Orlando actually got Professor Pig better than he got Damian.
Okay. I like that. I didn't have a problem with Pig. I just Orlando's Damian in this book really grinded my gears, and I'll be honest, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I'm going to buy the rest of the books because that's who I am.
Yep, me too. Yep.
But right now, just based on issue 1, like we left Batman the Shadow issue 1, and I was just like, woohoo, let's come to the party. I was like ready for this. This issue number 1 has me like, I'm going to buy it because I have to, because that's who I am, but I'm not going to like it. And I hate doing that, but that's just how issue 1 left me.
I definitely do not disagree with that. I think I'm maybe a little bit more up on it than you are, but then maybe that's because I have a huge affinity for both characters, and so I'm just kind of like, I'm happy they're together still.
Well, back to that point, I think I like them being together, but I think that was a drawback, in my opinion, of this first issue, is that they never actually met in this issue. Like at least in the first issue of Batman the Shadow, at least by like that last panel, you kind of had a confrontation with the two, like or the tease of it. And in this one, they're still on their separate little tracks right now. Like Batman's dealing with Damian, Shadow is having that weird, awesome conversation with Pig in jail.
Yep,
and I haven't gotten the joy of that crossing over yet. It's like they have that intersected.
That's a really good point, but there are two things in this book that I think one is not done well, but I don't think yet, having only in the first issue, and one that I really like. One you alluded to, the awesome conversation with Pig, but the idea when he says the Shadow doesn't know is actually a really, really interesting concept, because we have not really seen that ever with the character. This idea like he does not know what's going to happen. The Shadow knows everything. That's part of the fun of his character, that he can read your mind and figure it out, and there's this big mystery, but he has the upper hand because he's prepared, and it's Batman, blah blah blah. But kind of like a good Batman story is when Batman's not prepared, when he's flummoxed. I'm thinking, like Long Halloween, Hush,
Court of Owls.
Those are all great stories because Batman there's a real danger because he can't figure out the mystery. And I hope that plays out well here. The other thing that this book doesn't spend time on, and I feel like maybe it should, is the death of Margot Lane. Like there is her burial, and he goes to visit her, and we just get the little text that says Margot, and then that's it. But we don't get any other information. How did she die? Was it old age? Was she murdered? Did he know before? Why is he showing up as the Shadow and not Lamont? There's a lot of questions there that I feel like maybe in the hands of a different writer could have felt like with a larger emotional impact, especially since this is a Dynamite book first, which means that we really should be serving the story of the Shadow and
I was
going to
say the exact same thing, yes. Which also I think ties to the fact that the Shadow stuff was the most interesting part of this book to me, which is so weird for me to say as such a Batman fan, who also enjoys the Shadow, but I'm Batman first. And the Shadow stuff I wanted more of because that was actually, in my opinion, the good stuff in this book.
I agree. And that's probably because the characterization of the Shadow maybe feels more correct to you than the characterization of Damian. I did kind of like that scene with Damian where he's like, I put a tracer on you. He's like, impossible. My suit can sense it. And it kind of goes all the way through that. I kind of liked that little, testing ground area. That was fun. But again, it feels like a regression of Batman and Robin's relationship, which I didn't like. Did you get the Great Gatsby reference in this book?
Oh, now you're asking. I'm going to say yes because I loved Gatsby, but I cannot remember it a week later. So tell it to me because I'm sure I got it when I read it.
So it's very subtle. So the death of Margot, there's a at her coffin, and it tells you where it is, Long Island, New York, Blue Coal Cemetery. But the first thing it tells you is that we're in East Egg, which is
East Egg, yes,
which is where the Buchanans live. And I thought that was fantastic because the eggs are not real geography on the island. They don't exist. They were made up by F. Scott Fitzgerald for the purpose of his story. And so, I mean, the Gold Coast exists, these rich mansions and whatever else, but they're not called eggs, to the best of my understanding. So I kind of love that, for whatever weird reason, Shadow Batman exists in the same world as Great Gatsby.
And this is what you get when you have two English teachers talking comic books.
Yeah, what are you going to get? Hey, you come here for the analysis and the fun Easter eggs. That's all we can give you. This book does not have much in the way of thematic analysis, however, so I cannot give you much. It also ends, I think, in a really weird place where he's like, here, I've got you this grenade. Here you go, Batman.
But Dynamite books do tend to end in weird places, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
I've always felt that way. Like, they don't typically have, like, the caption to let me know the book's over. It's like I just turn the page and go, oh, that was the last page. Okay.
Yep, that's how it is. Although, something's definitely up with Batman because his text bubbles are black. That would indicate that something is not quite right with him.
That is true. Well, I think that Tim, I know this is going to be a shock to you, but we talked longer than we planned on talking.
We always do. We always do.
Tim, I want to thank you so much for a long overdue and much postponed and belated conversation about the Batman and Shadow. I'm so glad you came over again to talk these two characters with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to come on to the Suicide Squadcast. And I would do it more if schedules allowed such things. So maybe we set a realistic goal this time and wait for Shadow Batman to be over, and then before we say let's do another issue, and then before we know it, it's over.
Yes. I think that's very true. So how about you go ahead and you shamelessly plug away. Tell the people where to find you on the interwebs.
Well, people can find me personally at Timothy PG13 on Twitter. Apart from that, you can check out thoughtbubbleaudio.com, which is my podcast network, and you can check out a whole variety of shows. You can check out Supergirl TV Talk, in which another host, Frank, and I talk about CW's Supergirl. You can talk about Beer With Geeks, which we talked a bit about tonight, in which Frank and I also sit down and geek out about a bunch of random stuff from our past, stuff from our present, potentially stuff from our future. We are the three ghosts of Christmas in podcast form. And then, of course, you can also check Hate Watch with us and Starkville's House of El Krypton, which are two shows, one talking about sci-fi's Krypton, and the other one, Hate Watch with us, I think is actually kind of self-explanatory within the title. And then you can also check myself out and another host on Academy Rewind, in which we are taking on this very ambitious project of watching every single Best Picture Oscar nominee from every decade. And it's been a good time so far, and you are welcome to join that conversation.
And, of course, you can find me on the Suicide Squadcast with my Tim And obviously, you're on our YouTube channel probably, so you can figure out where to find me. But www.suicideSquadcast.com. You can also find me personally on Twitter at ScottDC27. And I just want to again thank Tim for coming on over. And I unfortunately have a little boy who needs to go back to bed.
Well, that's okay.
So I think we're going to wrap this up, and all I can say is cheers.
Cheers.